Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We are at the midway point of the 2053 season, and thus far, everything has gone extremely well for the Rockies. 55 and 26 record, so on pace for 110 wins if we keep winning at this rate. And we are up 13 and a half games in the Western Division of the National League. Also have the best record in baseball. So the team thus far is positioned very well in our attempt to repeat as World Series champions. And we've done that despite some pretty significant injuries this year. Our third baseman, Alex Ortega, just got back from the IL, but he's only played 7 games for us this year. Starting shortstop Jordan Casares has been banged up. Best pitcher in baseball history. And our ace, Rogelio Loera, has been on the IL for about a month at this point. Our center fielder, who was our big free agent acquisition this past offseason, Eddie Farley, is in the midst of his second trip to the injured list. And Chase Crawford, who was in the mix to be our closer, has been out all season thus far. And the guy who we brought on later in the offseason to take over as closer, Tawase Adebamge, has also had a stint on the IL this year and not been incredibly effective. So to have a 55-win record with the number of injuries that we have is a testament, hopefully, to how good this team is. As we get closer to the month of July, we'll obviously be spending some time with the amateur draft, international amateur free agency, and we're going to be perusing the trade market. We don't have any significant holes on the team at this point. With the type of season that we're having, obviously we're doing well both offensively and defensively. And we've got the best offense in the National League, first in runs scored. And right now we're third in the NL in runs allowed, despite playing all those games in cores. So things are going really well, but I do feel like we could potentially look for some help at catcher. And with the fact that our shortstop, Jordan Casares, as I mentioned, has already spent some time on the IL and is now fragile in terms of his injury proneness, bringing on another good glove as a utility infielder who's capable of playing short for perhaps an extended period of time if we do have an injury to Casares is something that we're going to investigate. So we're not going to make any decisions right now. We do have a few players that we're scouting. You can see a few centers and a catcher. I'm playing baseball, not hockey right now. A catcher, as well as several potential middle infielders that we're getting better scouting reports on, but it's going to be a bit until we get those because we're also doing some final scouting of the top prospects who are going to be available in the draft in a couple of weeks. And we've made it to the month of July. International free agent signing period has begun for the international amateurs. Excellent young DH Adam Fields just won batter of the month, or hitter of the month more accurately, for the month of June. 413 average, 9 homers, 25 ribbies, and 18 runs scored. Hitting .350 this year, 28 homers, 81 ribbies. Not bad for a Rule 5 acquisition a few years ago. The crazy thing is, even with the great season that Fields is having, it pales in comparison to what Elijah Moore and Manny Fernandez are doing. Two of them with 39 and 38 home runs as we sit here on July 1st certainly have 60 in their target. And if they remain this hot for the rest of the season, they could be pushing either for 70 or even 73 home runs. So some magical marks potentially for Elijah Moore and Manny Fernandez this year. Can see that Manny Fernandez right now is a very strong candidate to win a triple crown if he can get past Elijah Moore in terms of home runs. Just taking a quick look at the latest stats, no surprise that we haven't changed. We're first in runs scored, still third in runs allowed. Had a over 700 winning percentage for a second consecutive month in June. And even at 59 and 28, we've actually underperformed expectations by one game. An incredible 33 and 12 record at home. And we've even been really good on the road at 26 and 16 thus far this season. Turning to the international amateurs, a few bats obviously stand out, at least as far as our scout thinks, but don't have the best read on any of them. Catcher Vinny Viguera out of Venezuela. Looks like a pretty nice bat for a catcher and like the durability. Looks like he's going to be a pretty miserable offensive player, though, or defensive player. And doesn't really have a spot to play at 5'11", so he's a DH, and I just don't think the bat is special enough to make him the guy that we'll chase after this year, but maybe it will be. We'll see what the other options are. First baseman Juan Mendez, another pretty mediocre defensive player, or more accurately, a potentially poor defensive player who does have a pretty nice bat potentially. Center fielder Ethan Ewell from Australia, like the durability. Really more of a corner outfielder and probably honestly a left fielder on a good defensive team. Does look like he could have a decent bat with above average contact and borderline excellent home run power. So he could certainly be an interesting player, particularly in Colorado. And then shortstop Jose Alvarez. Looks like he could be pretty versatile defensively, play just about any position in the infield. Don't love the bat and really dislike the personality, though. So not all that impressed with these batters. We'll see what's available on the pitching side. Oof. Haven't even looked at the guy, and he's a 5-star pitching prospect with 70 stuff, 70 movement, and 80 control potential. I don't care that it's low scouting accuracy. Luis Nunez looks like he could be an exceptional pitcher. Already almost has a major league fastball at 16 years old. Still working on his sinker, his changeup, and his curve. The concern is if that curveball doesn't get any better than it is and the changeup doesn't develop, he's kind of a 2.5 pitch pitcher and probably not optimal in terms of being a starter down the line, but he does have ground ball tendencies. He's a ground baller pitcher type. Looking at the OSA ratings, they're not quite as high on him in his movement particularly as our scout is, but there's no guarantees that he won't just become a reliever. But I think he's got a real good chance at being an excellent reliever if that's all he ends up doing. And certainly it's probably a coin flip as to whether he'll develop to become an effective starter in terms of a 3-pitch arsenal. But I'll certainly offer him a contract. He's looking for the maximum. We'll meet his demand, submit that to him. Didn't love any of the batters, and with a potential pitcher like that available, easy decision for me that I don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about. And unfortunately for us, Mr. Nunez prefers the offer from the Reds, so he will not be joining our organization. Positively, as far as the injury situation, we just started Rogelio Loera with a rehab assignment yesterday. Chase Crawford has now pitched 2 games in AAA. Has not been good with a 9 ERA across 9 innings pitched in 2 games as a starter. But he's going to be a reliever for us anyways. Getting to the point where we're going to need to make a decision about the pitchers. We could send down Javon Williams, who still has options. but all he's done is put up a 1.26 ERA in AAA and a 0.92 ERA in the majors this year. So even though he's one of the few pitchers on our team that doesn't have ground ball tendencies, hard to think that that's the right choice. Latrell Young used to have ground ball tendencies, and he's now actually a neutral ground ball fly ball ratio type guy at this point. But he's also been very successful this year with a 2.28 ERA over 47 and a third innings for us. Important lefty for us out of the pen. So that could mean that it's the end of the run for Darius McLeod with us. 38-year-old. He is an extremely popular player, but his ERA this year has ballooned to 7.33, giving up 32 hits and 10 walks and 23 and a third innings pitched. His BABIP of 342 is certainly high, but as a 38-year-old, just don't see him being in our long-term plans. So in order to make room for our potential closer in Chase Crawford, I think it's time to see if we can get anything for McLeod in return. I'm not expecting all that much. I guess we'll look for catchers, since that's a position we might want to upgrade in terms of our backups. Yeah, not surprisingly, not a ton of options there. Ramon Rodriguez, 32-year-old, no thank you. And Luis Montalvo of the Twins, not a bad backup catcher, but making $5.5 million this year and then over $8 million each of the next 2 years. So not really anyone all that exciting for McLeod at this point, perhaps not surprisingly. And unfortunately, there weren't really any interesting options out there for McLeod. Generally useless and or very highly paid, and not particularly effective players were offered for him. He did have 2 option years left, so we tried to demote him, but he refused the assignment. Not a shock at age 38. So I think we are just going to waive and DFA him at this point, and that will allow us to bring Mr. Crawford up to the major league team. See what Hartman wants to do with the bullpen. And yeah, he's going to stick with Atabamge at this point. Have Crawford and Vargas, 2 other guys who have closed for us in the past, in the setup roles at this point, in case Atabamge doesn't perform well going forward. He has continued to get his ERA down. I know that's hard to believe when it's at 5.75, but he definitely has been pitching somewhat better in recent weeks. And there's just not a lot of talent left among the international amateur free agents. We're going to go back to Vinny Guerra. As much as I said I don't love the fact that he's only a DH, he's the best player that's available at this point. So we'll at least try to take a flyer on him. He's looking for the full $5 million. Don't know whether we'll end up with him or not, but at least we're going to make an attempt. And we did end up signing Vinny Guerra, so at least we will have another bat in our farm system. He'll go to our international complex, take a look at the All-Star game. I would have to think we're going to have a fair amount of players on the team with a 65-28 record. Dave Alvarado, 10-2 with a 2.86 ERA, starting pitcher on the team. And even with the injury, Rogelio Loera, and you can see he just ruptured his UCL in a minor league appearance. Hadn't seen that yet, but I did see that in his first start with us just a couple days ago. He only lasted 2/3 of an inning and didn't say injury pending at that time. But sadly, Mr. Loera with the ruptured UCL at the age of 40, going to be 41, and we've got a $36 million team option for him next year, which, given that he's going to be closing in on 42 by this time next year and obviously going to miss the first half of the season, hard to imagine, given that his ratings have started to drop dramatically, that he will be back with us next year. The most disappointing thing for us and for him is that, as I mentioned, he was 6-1 with a 2.65 ERA for us this year. Made another All-Star team, but he was trying to get his 300th win this year, and he's going to be stopped at 296. And as I said, we're definitely not going to be able to exercise that option for $36 million next year. Could we conceivably try to pick him up for less in the free agent market if he doesn't retire? Possible, but I did look a day ago, and it didn't show injury pending, but when I saw that, or maybe it did and I just missed it, but I don't think it did. But when I did see that he had only went 2/3 of an inning in that appearance, it concerned me a little bit because I honestly wasn't thinking significant injury. I was just thinking that they were, for some reason, using him as a reliever down in AAA rather than a starter. So I was concerned about that and was going to come back and check on that. But instead, Mr. Loera's career with the Rockies is almost certainly over. And who knows, his major league career and one of the great careers in baseball history may be over as well. If his career is over, he would finish 296 and 148, so exactly a 667 winning percentage, a 3 ERA. I know that in the past, Three Quarters Badger has commented that he wasn't going to get under 3 because of pitching in Colorado, but he did get it from 3.01 down to 3.00 with his good performance when he was pitching this year. And he's going to finish, if he is done, with an incredible 6,342 strikeouts in less than 4,000 innings. Just a boatload of all-star appearances, Cy Young Awards, and of course he won his second World Series title with us last year. So that certainly, though, will potentially change what we need to do in the trade market now. Because I do like our top 4 starters in Alvarado, Vasquez, Ortega, and Toledo. But now they're all moving up in their 1st through 4th starters instead of 2nd through 5th starters. And Victor Fields, who had started 7 games for us since Loera ended up on the IL, is now potentially a full-time starter for us. We still do have the options with a lot of these players, notably Arabamge, Crawford, Vargas, and Will Lucio. We've got lots of options who can start for us. The question is, since we are undoubtedly a win-now team, whether we want to perhaps pursue somebody over the next 3+ weeks to potentially be an upgrade for our pitching staff. We still do have a fair amount of money to take on a contract. So we'll see who's available. But anyways, back to the All-Star announcements after that disappointing news about Mr. Loera. Will Lucio out of the bullpen, who I was just talking about, 3-1, 2.42 ERA, a third pitching All-Star for the Rockies. And Latrell Young, the lefty we were talking about not that long ago, also an all-star. So 4 all-star pitchers for the Rockies. I would doubt that that's something that the team has ever achieved in its, at this point, 60-plus year history. Other all-stars for the Rockies, not a surprise, first baseman Adam Fields and first baseman Elijah Moore, both having monster seasons. Fields really plays DH for us more often than not, but no surprise to see the two of them. Danny Ruiz, our second baseman, hitting .312 with 10 homers. Left fielder Robbie Carrillo, .279, 24 homers and 60 ribbies. And right fielder Bobby Perez, .235 average, but does have 25 homers. And he was also named an All-Star. So 9 All-Stars for the Colorado Rockies this year. I think that's the most that we've had in this playthrough, not just with the Rockies, But I think with either the Pirates or the Kansas City Royals throughout our OOTP 23 adventures, I don't recall having 9 All-Stars in a single season. But if you've got a 65-28 record, that's the type of thing that's going to at least put you in the mix to have that many big-time players on your team. And Darius McLeod, who we DFA'd a week ago, is now at a decision point. I don't think he's going to accept the demotion. So I guess we'll see if we can get maybe something different for him at this point. I'm guessing it's not going to be all that interesting, but we'll give an attempt to at least pick up something. Obviously, if anyone was really interested in him, they would have picked him up off the waiver wire. But now the Dodgers are offering us Jose Gonzalez, 24-year-old from Johnstown, New York. First baseman, not much of a hitter, not much of a glove, but he does have an option year left. So we'll go ahead and trade McLeod for him to at least get something. Maybe we can get them to throw in a little bit of cash for us too. You never know. We may need every bit of that cash to help us if we're going to be taking on a big salary down the line. Doesn't look like we're going to get too much cash from them, if any at all. All right, we can get a couple $100,000 from them. Better than nothing. We'll complete the trade. Fans are unhappy that we let McLeod go, but in addition to getting the cash back that we got in the trade, we also got that salary off the books. So that definitely helped us open up a little bit of more money for free agents rather than having to eat the salary by just letting him go. Center fielder Eddie Farley just starting a rehab assignment. Looks like he went 3 for 3 yesterday in his first game. So we should have him back very shortly. But right now we're going to turn our attention to the first-year player draft, which is tomorrow. And from our scouting, it seems like there's going to be decent depth in the draft this year. It would be shocking if we get a potential superstar at pick number 31, but having done some scouting of the potential top couple rounds over the past few months of this season, do feel like we'll probably get a couple of quality players in the first 2 rounds this year. So we will start the draft and see who's available with the final pick of the first round. And we usually start looking at the top batters. This year we'll change things up a little bit and look at the top pitchers. And there's 6 4-star potential pitchers who are still available. Starting pitcher Matt Bland, 17-year-old lefty. A lot to like about him. Certainly, if he develops that full 3-pitch arsenal, could be a pretty effective starting pitcher. Has good stamina. Doesn't have the ground ball tendencies that we would like in a perfect world for someone we're going to draft, but definitely a solid prospect. Ryan Collins, another 17-year-old high schooler pitcher, probably not as great in terms of his movement and control. Does potentially have a 4-pitch arsenal, but he will need that changeup development to develop to get there. Also has really good stamina. Both pretty decent prospects for a 31st pick in a draft. Closer Edgar Hurtado, not going to go with a closer in the first round, particularly one who looks like he may be a solid major league pitcher, but nothing incredible. Starting pitcher Tyrese Payne, like the good work ethic, a guy who looks like he could have a 4 or actually a 5, perhaps 6-pitch arsenal. Movement isn't great, so he's not potentially a perfect fit for Colorado. Mario Pena, another high school starting prospect. Extreme fly ball tendencies, not the greatest personality in the world. Probably not the direction that we would go. And then Chris Thompson, a 19-year-old. Another good, solid starting pitching prospect. Don't think he's going to be a front end of the rotation guy, but with that potential 5-pitch arsenal, really good stamina and holding runners, and he's already throwing in the mid 90s. Certainly looks like he could be a really nice, third or fourth starter if he develops completely. So I kind of like Bland, Collins, and Thompson the best of the three pitchers, but let's take a look at the batters before we make a decision. If any of these pitchers had ground ball tendencies, that would have made them more attractive to me, but none of those top three prospects do, unfortunately. And I guess with the batters, there's only one 4-star potential player to look at. Kimakeo Miuna, 17-year-old center fielder. Like the durability, don't love the low work ethic. Could be a respectable defensive center fielder, but not optimal. Do potentially like the bat, though. Really good contact hitter with some gap power. Enough speed to generate some doubles and triples. Also could have plus home run power if everything develops. Given that low work ethic, though, you do kind of wonder a bit whether everything will develop. So I'm going to spend some time looking at the rest of these 3.5-star players and then do a few other searches just on my typical things where I'll look for players with really high potential in the batting categories just to make sure that there's nobody that slipped through the cracks, and come back and let you know what our scout recommends we do and what we decide to do. So I think I have my decision for the first round down to 2 players, but interested in what our new scouting director, Zane Collins, recommends. He recommends center fielder Andres Verdugo out of Orono, Maine. Not a bad prospect, but I don't think I'm going to go with him. Player that I was thinking of that I'm going to pass on, and this was not an easy decision, was the impossible to sign center fielder Jordan Evangelista. I think he's a pretty interesting prospect. Not a perfect defensive center fielder, but that bat is potentially extremely interesting. Signability is reportedly impossible, so he's a guy who's going to be looking for probably $15 million a year to sign. But this is a year where we've got room in the budget with almost $14 million for free agents, plus the $8 million that we put aside for the draft to potentially bring him on board. But because I am playing for this year and we just suffered that significant injury to Rogelio Loera, I want to make sure that we retain enough money to potentially bring on some major league players who can help get us to where we want to go, which is trying to repeat as World Series champions. So because of that, I'm going to go with the lefty starting pitching prospect, Chris Thompson. A little older than the other high schoolers, but really good stamina, good at holding runners, throws harder than anybody. Now, granted, he's a year and a half older than a lot of the other guys, so that's not a shock. But like the fact that he could have potentially 5 or 6 major league pitches and potentially plus stuff, plus movement, and plus control. Not a perfect Colorado pitcher. But honestly, we're not going to be playing this playthrough when we have him anyways, given that we've probably only got a season or 2 left before we move over to OOTP 24. But still going to try to build this team properly for the future. So we're going to go ahead and draft Chris Thompson at the end of the first round, see what our scouting director recommends for the second round. Another one of those pitchers is still out there, Mario Pena. Was not necessarily our top choice among them because of the personality and the extreme fly ball tendencies, but there still may be a little value there. And here in the second round, and Jordan Evangelista is still out there. With the second round pick, I'm going to take him. And again, I think I'm probably going to use the money up over the next 20 days before we get to the trade deadline so that it's going to be impossible for me to sign him. But we will get a second round pick back next year if we don't end up signing him. And if for some reason the players that we bring on aren't making a ton of money and we've got some room in the budget as a second round pick, there could be some incredible value here. So we are going to pick Mr. Evangelista here in the second round. And moving on to the third round, Manny Campbell, shortstop, still available. We'll see who we decide to go with this pick and let you know, and then probably speed through the rest of the draft. Although I won't actually speed through it. I just won't make you watch me spending time on it. And we're actually going to follow our scouts' advice here in the third round. If you've followed me playing this game, you'll know that typically a guy with low leadership and low intelligence is not the direction we're going to go. But he is durable, and he just seems to be the most well-rounded hitter of anyone who's available at this point at the end of the third round. Not going to be a great defensive player. He can be a mediocre corner outfielder in addition to being a mediocre infielder at a lot of positions, but the bat there is not that bad for a late third round pick. So we are going to go ahead with Manny Campbell in the third round here in 2053. And I've got one trade put together. I don't love it, and I'm not sure, but I suspect some of you may not love it either. But we're going to pick up Israel Mays, a shortstop from Toronto, and Toronto's going to retain a bit of his contract. He's a pretty solid defensive player, which, as I mentioned, felt like we needed a guy who could play a solid defensive shortstop for us in the event that Casares gets hurt. And quite honestly, with May's bat, he may just take over as our starting shortstop and allow the injury-prone Casares to move into more of a utility infielder who's a great defender role for us, which wouldn't be the end of the world. But Mays is only 27. His arbitration number next year is going to be about $9 million. So really, I kind of think he will be our starting shortstop, even though he's not as good defensively as Casares. Despite a batting profile that looks decent, he's only put up a 79 OPS plus and a 78 WRC plus over the course of his career. But he's having the best offensive season of his career this year, and certainly would suspect with those contact, gap power, and home run power ratings, which are all a little bit above average, and slightly above average speed, that he could probably put up some pretty decent offensive numbers for us in Colorado. Now, to pick him up, we have to give up two players off of our major league roster. First is Bobby Mata. This is a guy who we picked up in the Rule 5 draft a few seasons ago, and was commenting back and forth after our last episode with Three Quarters Badger about Mata and Milinhos, some of our backup outfielders who are kind of excess at this point. In Mata's defense, though, I'll say the guy's hit 320 in 197 major league at-bats, and he's only a 23-year-old player. So I don't love giving him up, but quite honestly, he is a surplus outfielder for us at this point. He's kind of a fifth outfielder at best when everyone on our team is healthy. So I don't love giving him up, but moving on from him will allow us, if I could do anything properly, to bring Mr. Farley, who now is banged up for a day with knee tendonitis down in his rehab assignment, but to bring Farley back onto the roster. That'll open up a spot in the outfield for him. And then the other player that we're going to get rid of, and this may be surprising to you, is Rogelio Terrazas, who had been our starting shortstop at times, had been our starting second baseman at times. This year, you can see he still started 75 games for us, so he's been a pretty regular player for us with some of the injuries that we've had. But he's not as good defensively as the shortstop we're going to bring on board. And his batting ratings don't look quite as good. I do like that he's durable, and I will note that even though his batting ratings overall look like they might not be quite as good, he has been a more productive hitter over the course of his career. League average WRC plus and a little above average in terms of his OPS plus. Now, it's fair to say that some of that is driven by Colorado, where he's been a little bit above average as compared to when he was with Washington, when he was pretty close to an average offensive player. But the big reason that I'm willing to include Terrazas is that he's a free agent after this year, and he's looking for an 8-year deal at almost $18 million a year. So there's just no way that we are going to bring him back and feel like we're definitely upgrading defensively with Israel Mays. And we also get a player who we've got retention of next season at a potentially pretty reasonable number. And the reason why that's important is that I mentioned Terrazas is a free agent who's going to be looking for big money. And our starting second baseman, recently named All-Star, as we talked about, Danny Ruiz, who's hitting even better than him, 322 this year, is also a pending free agent. And he's looking for over $26 million a year next year. Now, we conceivably might need to bring him back, but we're definitely not going to be able to bring back both Terrazas and Ruiz. But having Mays on board and Casares, albeit injury-prone, already signed, along with the youngster Edgar Estrada, who we picked up in the Rule 5 this past year, and is hitting 260 for us in very minimal playing time. Looks like he could be a decent bat, not a great fielder. But if we had to next year, with Mays at short and then Casares and Estrada potentially at second, we could still piece together an infield even if we can't bring Danny Ruiz back. Now, granted, with the fact that we're going to have Loera's salary coming off of the books next year, we probably can bring Danny Ruiz back. But I think the main thing this does is it gives us a second very good defensive shortstop on our major league roster, besides just relying on the fragile Casares, who is a little bit better defensively, but I don't think is quite as good a bat as Mays is. And we are getting them to keep a chunk of his salary, so we're actually going to improve our money a little bit, which will, depending on what we do with other trades, potentially give us enough money to still make a run at Jordan Evangelista, who we picked in the second round. So I'm definitely not feeling incredible about this trade, but I am very concerned that if we lose Casares as we're heading into the playoffs, we just don't have anyone who's as good defensively at shortstop as Israel Mays. You can see in everything except his turn double play rating, he is better than Terrazas, who is our, right now, backup shortstop. And I just feel like we will be better positioned to deliver the defense that our pitching staff needs with a guy like Mays on our team rather than Terrazas. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade. Fans not happy that we got rid of Terrazas. They are happy that we brought on Mays. Taking a look at fan interest now, it's down to 90. We have been selling out recently because we are continuing to play some incredible baseball. I'll take a quick look and see. I'm guessing Casares probably loses his spot to the younger Mays, who I think potentially has a better bat, even though it might not necessarily look that way in terms of his performance this year. But let's see what Hartman would do. Yeah, he would put Mays right into the lineup, and he would actually bat Mays sixth. So, again, I think Mays' ratings indicate he should be a better hitter than he's shown thus far in his career. Hopefully Colorado and the fact that he's now 27 years old and a little more developed will bring some of that out of him. But it does let us move Casares into kind of a super utility role, potential great defensive substitute at short or third and second if we actually had played him there over the years. So losing Mata and Taratsis doesn't make me feel great, but I still think we're a little better positioned for this year and then definitely better positioned for next year with the fact that we'll now feel like we've got Mays definitely going to be on the roster instead of trying to pay twice as much potentially for Taratsis and having to sign him for many years into the future. And I've got another trade here that I'm going to do, and I'm suspecting that some of you may not like it, so definitely share your thoughts in the comments below if you really don't like this one. But the goal is to win this year, and I want to feel real good about my pitching staff, and clearly losing our number one starter makes me feel less good about the staff. So we're going to trade away starter Jose Alains, who is a nothing prospect. Closer Jalen Hoskins, who's not a bad pitcher. He's put up a 2.88 ERA this year in AAA, but with the poor movement on his pitches and the extreme fly ball tendencies, I don't think he's going to be a big-time pitcher ever in Colorado. And at 26, those tendencies are kind of why we've never even given him a shot yet. But we're also giving up Cameron Miller, former first-round draft choice and the number 18 prospect in baseball, one of our top two pitching prospects, who's 6-2 in AAA this year with a 4.88 ERA. He's definitely going to be a solid major league starter if you look at his ratings and you look at his 3 average to above average pitches, plus a potential changeup that could get close to being major league average. And he's got the movement on his pitches that we'd love to see in Colorado, but he doesn't have ground ball tendencies, doesn't have the greatest personality in the world. You know, that work ethic could be why he's almost 24 years old and he still just made it to AAA this year, despite kind of having everything ahead of him. And he's still got some work to do to really reach his full potential. But as I said, he's a former first-round draft pick who's the 18th ranked prospect in baseball. He's certainly a very valuable player to give up. But with that package of 3, and primarily because of Miller, we can pick up Gus Giron from the Guardians, a pitcher who, as you can see, is making $28.4 million a year for the next 3 seasons, but we've got Cleveland to retain half of that contract. And Giron, I think, is a really good pitcher for our park. He's not a great pitcher, but he does have really good movement on his pitches, and he's got a 3-pitch arsenal of above-average pitches, which leaves him with above-average stuff and above-average control. He's got the stamina to start. He's really good at holding on runners, and he's a ground baller pitcher who throws in the low to mid-90s with extreme ground ball tendencies. So I think he's going to be a really good pitcher for us in Colorado, not counting on him to be an ace. And if you look at the course of his career, he's been an above average pitcher, but not a way above average pitcher in his 8 years that he's pitched in Cleveland. But he does kind of give us the fifth starter that we need, and we're going to have him for the next few years at a pretty reasonable price of $14.2 million. So what this trade will do is it'll put us back in a position where the Alvarado, Vasquez, Ortega, Toledo, and then Duran, that were really like all five of our starters. Now, you could argue that they're all like number 2 or 3 starters, but the fact that we'll have 5 guys that are basically interchangeable, even after that horrible injury to Loera, gives me a lot of confidence that by the time we get to the playoffs, 4 of them will be healthy and ready to go, and we can mix and match even if we have another injury. And as I've talked about, between Fields, Atabamge, Crawford, and Vargas and Lucio, we could fit together 4th or 5th starters with those guys if we wanted to. But I feel that Duran is a better potential starter than either of them, and bringing him on for $14 million for the next few years, not that there was really any prospect that we would be exercising the team option on Loera at this point when he's going to be 41 years old and missing half the season through an injury. But I do feel like with the fact that we've got Alvarado, Toledo, Vasquez, and Ortega all signed for next year, plus if we make this trade, we'll have Duran signed, puts us in a position where our starting rotation is intact next year, and we're going to be able to devote all of our money in the off season to some of the decisions that I've mentioned we're going to have ahead of us, with Danny Ruiz looking for a really big number in free agency. And I feel like we're going to play this season, and we've got next season that we're also going to play. I feel like we've got a year and a half of baseball ahead of us with the Rockies before we move on to OOTP 24. And I just feel that this deal here gives us the best chance to compete for a title this year and hopefully compete for another title next year. So it's not a low-cost deal, and I think it's very conceivable that 2 or 3 years from now, Cameron Miller, with his profile, could be a better major league pitcher than Gus Duran, and certainly will be a more economical pitcher than Gus Duran. But we're in win-now mode right now, and I think having Duran on the team gives us the best chance to win now. So we're going to go ahead and do that trade. And the fans are pleased we've got Duran on board, traded away one of the top prospects in baseball. You can see our minor league system is now down to 6th, not just because of the loss of him, I'm sure, but last time I checked in, I think we were 2nd, so certainly that didn't help. You can see we're down to only $9 million for free agents. So with that trade, it is going to get a little trickier to potentially bring on Mr. Evangelista. But I feel like the team at this point is, with the additions of Gus Duran and Israel Mays, and of course the addition of Gus Duran now does mean that Javon Adams, despite that 0.71 ERA, is probably going to be the odd man out that goes back down to AAA. I guess we could move on from DJ Cortez. I like the ground ball tendencies with him, but he hasn't been quite as good. He's the Rule 5 pickup from the Mets. I don't want to give up on him yet. So we're going to put Williams down for the next month to AAA. Sorry, Javon. Gus Giron comes onto the team. And he wants us to move Javi Toledo to the bullpen and keep Victor Fields in. We're not going to do that. But Giron, you can see, slots in as our fourth starter. Move Victor Fields back to the bullpen, even though he pitched reasonably well as a starter for us. And now feel with Alvarado, Vasquez, Ortega, Giron, and Toledo, we've got 5 really good major league starters. And when we do get to the postseason, we're only going to need 4 of them. So it just gives us a little more flexibility and insurance if we do have another injury to one of our starters over the last 2.5 months of the season or so. So I think with those 2 big trades, that's probably the heavy lifting for us this trade deadline. You can see attendance has kind of fallen off the last few games, and we've got no money for extensions at this point, given that we now have Giron's contract on the books, as well as the potential arbitration number for Mays. Now, clearly in the off season, when we do move on from Luera, that will open up some money for us to play with in terms of potentially keeping a Danny Ruiz or a Victor Fields on this team, or even the aging Latrell Young. But our flexibility and our opportunity to sign anybody to an extension right now is gone because of those moves that we've made. But we still can take on some contracts for this year, so we'll see how the next couple of weeks go. As I said, I don't think we're going to have another big trade in us. Those were 2 pretty big deals to bring Giron into the rotation and to bring Mays on as our starting shortstop. And you can see we've moved him back to 7th in the batting order now that Eddie Farley is back off of the IL. But we've definitely given up some talent, but I feel like we've brought on some talent in return that improves our pitching, improves our defense, and I do feel that Mays may be a much more effective offensive player in Coors than he has been in the early stages of his career with Toronto. And I thought we might be done with the trades, but here on July 27th, waiting to hear about a potential injury to Chase Crawford. If that ends up being something relatively serious, then maybe there's a chance that we add somebody else. You can see the record's 78-33 at this point. We are up 22.5 games in the NL West, and we are up, looks like, 14.5 games on the Nationals for the best record in the National League. So it would be shocking if we don't have home field advantage throughout the National League playoffs at this point. The White Sox are having a great year at 71-37, but even at that record, they're 5.5 games behind us for the best record in baseball. Elijah Moore still competing with Manny Fernandez and teammate Adam Fields to lead the league in home runs, although presumably it will be Fernandez or Moore. 60 homers still seems potentially within reach for both of those guys. I think 70 is looking less likely at this point. Moore and Fields both trying to catch Fernandez in home runs. Right now, if the season was over today, the St. Louis superstar would have a triple crown. Elijah Moore second in the league in OPS behind Fernandez, of course. Third in the league in batter WAR. Taking a look at some of the pitching stats, Dave Alvarado is third in the league in ERA and tied for the league lead in wins at this point, and third in the league in pitcher WAR. So some really nice seasons for the Rockies as a part of this brilliant season for the team thus far. And we've been waiting a couple days, still waiting for that diagnosis pending on Crawford. The longer it takes, it's generally not a positive thing, given that he missed until recently with that shoulder injury that he suffered in the off season. Not going to shock me if this ends up being a relatively serious issue. And I guess it could have been more serious. Forearm strain, going to be out for 4 to 5 weeks. So certainly over the near term, going to need to put him on to the injured list. And that will presumably allow us to bring back Javon Williams, who's now has an ERA under 1 in both AAA and the majors this year. Could also check in on Elijah Smith, who we promoted to AAA not that long ago. He's 2-2 with a 3.63 ERA. He is the top pitching prospect in our system, without a doubt at this point after that recent trade. But the number 15 prospect in baseball, who we picked 3rd overall in 2050, certainly looks like he is just about ready for the majors. Again, with the neutral tendencies and the normal pitcher type, not the perfect pitcher profile for Colorado, but you look at a pitcher with 4 above average major league pitches and an average changeup, so a 5-pitch arsenal, above average stuff, above average movement, and even slightly above average control. He is going to be a very important pitcher for us, or for somebody else if we decide to trade him in the coming year or two, I think for an extended period of time in the majors. And we are going to make one more trade, which isn't going to make our great young reliever happy, but he's going to be headed back to the minors. But the Red Sox are willing to dump Sal Lofton for take the rest of his contract. He's a guy that we actually looked at in a free agent last year. Didn't end up being able to make an offer to him. He was coming off of a pretty serious injury, but he's been effective this year for Boston and certainly has a great profile for Colorado with exceptional movement, extreme ground ball tendencies, ground ball pitcher type. Think he'll be a real nice arm for our bullpen. We just have to give up a aging pitcher in Chris Harmon, who they'll have rights to. So happy to make that trade. We'll go ahead and complete that deal. Fans happy to have Lofton on board. Unfortunately, that does mean that Javon Williams is going to be headed back to Albuquerque. Hopefully we will have him up when we get to September, although quite honestly, hopefully we'll have Chase Crawford back at some point too, but that just gives us even more depth for the bullpen. As I mentioned, I'm in win now mode with this team and feel like we want to give ourselves the most insurance possible to ensure that we are in a good position to win it all when we get to the playoffs this year. And I think bringing on another potentially big-time reliever to help our bullpen will help. You can see Geron off to a good start with us, 1-1 record, but a 0.79 ERA in 11 1/3 innings over his first 2 starts. So I think this is probably it for the Rockies. I know we've been going a little nuts here, but still have 1 day left to see if there's any more injuries that pop up and scour the universe of Major League Baseball in 2053 one last time, just to make sure there's no other opportunities we could try to take advantage of to hopefully ensure that this team can make a very long playoff run in the postseason this year. And I think I've officially become obsessed with trying to build a super team that is all but guaranteed to win this year, because I am going to make one more trade. We're going to trade away the backup outfielder Manlio Milhinhos, who along with Bobby Mata was a good contact and gap power hitter for us with limited home run power that was a former Rule 5 pick. Tony Pizarro, who's a decent pitching prospect, but with his fly ball tendencies, I don't think is ever going to be a big time player for us in the major leagues, but he's certainly the cornerstone of the deal. Aiden Asher, veteran, 38-year-old who was playing in the minors for us. Jose Gonzalez, who you may remember we picked up in the trade from the Dodgers when we dealt McLeod rather than eating his contract for the rest of the year. And center fielder Manny Flores, who's a non-prospect. And we're going to bring on shortstop Demetrius Washington from the Guardians, who's in the last year of a $37 million contract. With all the prospects we're giving them, the Guardians are going to eat the balance of his contract. But another really good defensive infielder with a lot of speed and some home run power. I think it's conceivable that he becomes our starting third baseman over the young Ortega, who's a pretty good player. But Washington just gives us a little more insurance if we have injuries. He is fragile, so I don't mind if he's not an everyday player, even if our manager wants him to be. I think I'll probably platoon him at third with Ortega, but just gives us another very talented glove, in this case with a pretty good bat also. 32-year-old, going to be 33 this offseason, going to be a free agent, as I mentioned. But over the course of his career, he's been a well above average offensive player, averaging 33 homers, close to 100 ribbies a year while hitting 263. So definitely an upgrade on our major league roster from Milhinhos. And Tony Pizarro, third round pick of ours a year ago, getting some value for the young 19-year-old who, thus far hasn't made it out of rookie ball, where he has a 6.12 ERA this season. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade. Fans are ecstatic that we brought on Demetrius Washington, so that's nice to see. Huge boost in fan interest. We're going to take advantage of that boost, hopefully, and jack our prices up $2 to 38 here. You can see we've sold out a few games recently, and with that big fan interest boost and our insane 80-33 record, the hope is that we'll continue to sell a lot of tickets, put Demetrius Washington onto the roster, and see what roster Hartman wants. And he moves Demetrius Washington to second base. Oh, and the suspended Danny Ruiz to the bench for now. That's a little surprising, but it might be because Ruiz is suspended. I think when Ruiz is healthy in a couple days, that it's probably going to be Ruiz at second and Demetrius Washington potentially at third. But we'll find out exactly how that goes according to our manager. And then obviously we have the opportunity to change that any way we like if we decide we don't like the way things look. But right now, and I guess it would be more interesting to look at the batting ratings than the pitching ratings, then I'm on the page of the batters. But I feel like all four of these trades that we've made this episode have helped us in our chance to win this year. And we were obviously playing great baseball before these trades, but we're obviously all in on trying to repeat this season. And so we are finally past the trade deadline here on August 1st. You can see that we've got a little less than $10 million left. The only unsigned draftee we have is Jordan Evangelista, who has that impossible demand. Negotiating with him says that we'll have to be significantly over $9.5 million to consider signing. We've got budget room of 10, 529, 240 left for signing bonuses and contracts. I don't know that $1,029,000 is going to be significantly above $9.5 million. But that is the amount of money that we have to spend. And we might as well roll the dice and see if the guy who is definitely a first round talent who slid to us at the end of the second round because of his impossible demands, if we could possibly get him on board, that would be huge in terms of replacing some of the talent that we've had to give up in some of those recent trades we've made. So we're going to at least roll the dice, submit the offer of every penny, literally, that we have to spend potentially to him, see whether or not he goes for that or not. And we'll find out the results of that in our next episode. Taking a quick look before we finish up at the team statistics. We are still first in the National League in just about every offensive category, first in runs scored. Runs allowed, we've actually slipped down to fourth, but we still hit an insane 22-5 month in July. Our 81-33 record is now 3 above of our Pythagorean expectations, but a insane 783 winning percentage at home and a pretty ridiculous 629 winning percentage on the road for the Rockies as we head into the month of August. And despite the serious injury, which has ended Loera's career with us, maybe ended his career overall, and Chase Crawford being on the IL for the second time this year, despite those things, definitely feeling like we have added as much insurance as was practical, and probably was even more than was practical, to ensure that even if we get a few guys banged up the rest of the way, we've got a pretty resilient roster that I think could once again do some crazy damage this postseason. And we're about 2 months away from finding out how that postseason goes. Taking a look at the standings, not the transactions, the standings. We're up by 24.5 games in the NL West, and we are up, looks like 15 games on the Nationals for the best record in the National League. And it looks like the White Sox have kind of come back a little bit recently, because we're up a full 8 games on them now for the best record in baseball. So it's going to be a huge upset if we don't finish this season with the best record in baseball and with an 81-33 record and a 711 winning percentage. We've got the potential to put up a regular season record that could be one of the best in the history of baseball. And we will find out how the Rockies do in that quest in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.